if you want a proof text for the type of theology espoused by Pat Robertson or Jerry Falwell, of course Falwell has passed away, but Pat Robertson is still alive, or a few other highly conservative religious leaders, you need look no further than that passage right there. Now, a proof text, for those who might not know what that is when you look at one small smidgen of a verse and you make a grand pronouncement about what that means. That's called a proof text. Much of the Bible's admonitions, in fact, I'll rephrase that, much of religion's, Christianity's prohibitions against homosexuality comes from minuscule proof texts. And this here can be seen as a proof text for a retributive type of God. You've heard perhaps, retribution. So God is exacting retribution because the people have done bad things. If you might remember back when Pat Robertson said that the hurricanes in Florida were caused by what? Walt Disney hosting gay pride, or gays in Florida. Jerry Falwell said that AIDS was God's retribution for the activity, the sexual behavior of homosexuals. And this text here that we just read says it flat out. Turn to Judges now. We're going to be in chapter 2, the one I just read. Judges 2, we're going to be looking at verse 20. So chapter 2, verse 20. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and God said, because this people have transgressed my covenant, they did not do what I told them to do, I will bring bad things to them. In this case, what it means is that the enemies of Israel will overtake Israel for a period of time. I cannot refute what Pat Robertson or Jerry Falwell say about hurricanes being caused by homosexuals, based on this. But that's actually not what today's sermon is going to be about. We're going to be going somewhere else. But I just wanted to bring that up. We might return to it later in the sermon. We'll see what happens. Today we're talking about Deborah, however. So let's jump to chapter 4. You know what's interesting about Deborah? She's one of 12 judges in the book of Judges. And the book of Judges is the one book that has the most women in all of the Bible. 19 women characters in all. Not everyone has a name, however, but 19 women, the most of any of them. Before looking at Deborah herself, though, I want to make a quick detour into what a judge actually is. The Hebrew is shofet. That's the word translated here, shofet. Yes, it definitely means to judge, like Judge Judy sitting on a bench, ruling things, or Deborah sitting under the tree of Deborah, making decisions, settling disputes. Equally, it is a leader, primarily a military leader. And one scholar refers to most of the military leaders in the book of Judges as guerrilla-style commanders. The types that would go out and do raids and then come right on back. Doesn't seem very nice, honorable, to be a military guerrilla commander. But that's Deborah and Gideon and Othniel and the other 9 or so judges. So now off to Deborah as a character. Deborah herself. Deborah brings about the destruction of Sisera's army single-handedly. Right? Right? Right. Who said right? Oh my gosh. F for the day. What's that? It wasn't a test. Yeah. Oh, correct. Okay. Deborah does indeed not do it single-handedly. In slight difference to many of the other judges, Deborah does it with a team. Barak is the first member of her team. When Dave was reading that passage, who considered Barak a weak military commander? Raise your hand. He abdicated his responsibility, so it seems according to the text. So raise your hand if you considered Barak to be abdicating his responsibility as a male military commander. 1, 2, 3, okay. The entire Sunday school team might have been teaching this then, perhaps for this entire month in Sunday school. Raise your hand if you think Barak, however, was recognizing Deborah's wisdom and strength, despite the fact that she was a woman in a type of culture that did not value women as highly as men. Was Barak cognizant of Deborah's God-given power? Rich is nodding yes. Chris says yes. Oh, I think we're evenly split. What's interesting is in the translation that Dave used, the NIV, right? That was yours? The NIV. And the NRSV, and a handful of other passages, or translations, are different slightly. Scholars are evenly divided as to whether or not Barak is abdicating or recognizing. If he's abdicating to Deborah, or if he's recognizing Deborah's strength. Scholars truly say it's difficult to tell from the text itself. And therefore, we kind of get to play psychologist with these characters. We get to wonder what it is that Barak is actually doing. Does he see Deborah and himself as equal teammates? An equal? Oh my gosh, that would be amazing, would it not? Here's a Bible character from roughly the period of the late Bronze and early Iron Age 1, around 1000 to 1200 BCE. A military commander recognizing the strength of a woman, to the point that he says, I can't go unless you go with. That's pretty good. So the two of them are working together. And together, the two of them defeat Sisera's army and Sisera. Right? The two of them together defeat the army and Sisera, correct? The Sunday school team gives no indication. Anna says no. Who are we missing from this team? We're missing the tent peg lady. Jael. Her name is Jael. Another woman. In the passage that Dave read, Deborah, when Barak says, I will only go if you go with me, And Deborah says, yes, okay, but because of what you just said, and the NRSV translates it differently, by the way, Sisera will be laid into the hands of a woman, will be sold into the hands of a woman, I think is what it says. The text does not tell us at that point if it's going to be Deborah or someone else. It's confusion. Deborah doesn't say, the Lord will deliver Sisera into my hands, just the hands of a woman. That woman turns out to be Jael. Now, this is where in the sermon I wasn't positive if I would go. I alluded to it, this direction, when I was giving the summary beforehand. In the section in chapter 4 that Dave did not read, Sisera flees from his chariot, runs to this Kenite. It's a tribe called the Kenites. They're Canaanite, but they're Kenite. Goes to this tent of Jael. She hides him. She even gives him milk, which is kind of sleep-inducing, and he's exhausted from battle. And then she covers him with a blanket, nice and warm. And then she takes a tent peg and a hammer and slams the tent peg into his temples until it lodges in the ground, killing Sisera. And then shortly after that, Barak comes running up to find Sisera, and Jael comes out and says he's inside dead. Nothing there that we should not share with children. Slightly violent, but probably not much more so than they see on TV, depending on what you let your kids watch. Chapter 5. Turn now to chapter 5 in Judges. We read our call to worship from chapter 5, but not from the section of chapter 5 that talks about exactly how Jael killed Sisera. In chapter 5, which is the poem, the Song of Deborah, Sisera does not die lying down under a blanket. Sisera is standing when she kills him with a tent peg. And she falls between her legs. Literally between her legs. In this passage, scholars have long ago recognized the sexual innuendo in this relationship between Jael and Sisera, as well as between Barak and Deborah. A sexual innuendo. Sisera portrays an emasculated male because he is undone by a woman, similar to Samson and Delilah. Barak also, if we take the abdication route for what Barak does when he interacts with Deborah, he too could be seen as an emasculated male. The text, especially in Judges 5, especially in Judges 5, supports what scholars call a reverse rape on Sisera. Last night I was texting with a friend of mine who is a youth leader at one of the richest Presbyterian churches in America, Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly. And I said, I've been doing some research on Deborah and Jael and Barak and Sisera, and pretty much a lot of what I read talks about all the sexual innuendo going on, especially in Judges 5, the Song of Deborah. And I said, I'm thinking I might go in the sexual innuendo route. And he said, I dare you. I said, it depends. Often we have Sunday school kids over there. But because of the snowstorm, they're not. So we're free to discuss this X-rated part of the Bible. That's not the ending to the sermon I intended. The actual ending that I intended was that certain scholars, in fact, an Old Testament professor of mine back from seminary, Professor Dennis Olson, a Lutheran ELCA, suggests that the story of Deborah really portrays a mutual shared leadership, mutual responsibility, and a sharing of the glory of a successful battle. Because Deborah shares the limelight with Jael, Barak. She does not march all on her own. She does it with a team. That was the intended ending. But now, we kind of have this other aspect. And if we return for a moment, as we wrap up this, so if you're getting bored, we're almost done. I didn't look at you, Tim, just because I thought you were bored. I needed to look at somebody. I could have looked at Dan, who yawned about 5 or 6 minutes ago, but I too have yawned in many sermons, so. If we return to the beginning of the sermon, when I talked about how preachers, church leaders like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and others interpret the Bible, interpret passages like what we read, that if you don't do, then this will happen to you. If you have homosexuals in Orlando, you will have hurricanes in Orlando. That is supported textually. But so is so many other aspects of life are equally supported in the Bible, are equally difficult to comprehend. Why would sexual innuendo be in the Bible? Why not? It's a part of human nature. It's also funny to the original hearers of that story, the Song of Deborah. They might even have chuckled and laughed. Here's the new ending for the sermon. So we're not going to go the mutual responsibility and how Deborah created a team. This might even follow from last week's sermon. Approach the Bible not as the Holy Bible, even though it says there right there. Approach it as a book. And this will be in the newsletter, by the way, my pastor reflection in the newsletter. Approach this reading with everything you have. All parts of your life. Even the bad parts. Even the sin parts. And yet always ask God, what is it you want me to do with what I am reading and who I am? And once we start to do that, you will find a lot of humor, gory stories, sexual innuendo, and amazing guidance for how to live your life. And you might even create a really good team, just like Deborah. So there, I wrapped up that other ending as well. That's it. I'm not going to say amen because today's informal snow day Sunday.